Justin Murphy, who now works from the D&C, grew up about 20 minutes east of Rochester in Penfield, went to the University of Chicago as well as Syracuse University, and is now a reporter for the Democratic Chronicle. He focuses on education at Rochester City School District, and he also wrote a book outlining basically the history of the education in Rochester and different things that had an influence on why things look the way they do right now. So without any further ado, here is Mr. Murphy.
Thanks. How you guys doing today? So like Mr. Byrne said, I'm a reporter. When I was in school, I always liked reading and writing a lot. I liked foreign languages a lot. And I didn't really, it took me a while to realize like a way to do that as a career, because you can't really be like a novelist or whatever for a career. And some people are, but it's hard. And I wasn't smart enough to be a teacher. So being a reporter for me is like really just feels like a perfect job for me. I think it's it's one of the most interesting jobs you can have. I'm always learning about other people's experiences, learning about my community, and then I'm in a position to do what I like, which is to write stories and to have them have an impact on the city. So like my primary job is in general to give people information about whatever it is that's happening. So in this case, what happened was when Monroe County, when there are people, in particular families that don't have somewhere to stay, Monroe County has a certain amount of beds at places, usually like a hotel, including a hotel, where they can put them at least for a short term until they get something better. In this case, the county kind of like very abruptly, without telling anybody or without a lot of forewarning, got rid of this one hotel that is like its largest source of beds. I don't know, maybe 50 beds, 50 rooms that they have there usually, and they decided right away they're not going to do that when there are still all these people in it. So that's like kind of a big policy change that's important to know, because that puts a lot of, and these are all families, that puts a lot of families and kids out on the street. So that's essentially a policy story. That's like how the county is deciding to spend its money and how it's going to run its programs. But a really important principle for me as a reporter is that I want to take that policy story and I want to bring it down to the level of human beings. Because that's what people like to read about. That's like ultimately what's important about policy stuff, is how it affects people. And so in this case, it was pretty obvious that I needed to go to the Motel 6, the hotel that we're talking about. So I got there at maybe 10:30 or so, and you can imagine it's a big hotel with, I don't know, maybe a couple, 200 rooms or something, and there's no, people don't have a sign saying where they are, the ones who are getting this help from the county. So I kind of need to snoop around and see if I can identify them, talk to people. So I'm in the parking lot. This can kind of be a fun part of the job sometimes. It's there's places that you're not supposed to be, but you ought to be, if it's on private property especially, and you know that as soon as somebody sees you, they're going to kick you out. So when you go in, you need to make it count and get connected before you get kicked out. So in this case, I'm snooping around on private property, and there's a guy, and he sees I have my press pass on, and says, "Oh, come with me," and he introduces me to a family that he knows who's about to get kicked out. And so I get to them. Turns out that they need to leave the hotel by 11. They're homeless. They're getting kicked out. They have to leave by 11. So I have kind of lucked into a perfect anecdote for my story. This is exactly what I'm talking about, is these people having to leave, and here they are literally packing their stuff and leaving. So this is kind of a case where I got lucky, but I got lucky because I put myself in the right position. I drove out there and I went and talked to people, and something fell into place for me, as opposed to sitting in the office and making phone calls and trying to do the story that way. And now from a writing perspective, they're like literally putting their stuff in bags and making phone calls to try to find a new place to stay. And so this isn't really the moment for me to be interviewing them because they're busy doing something and because there's like a very dramatic thing happening. So in terms of the story, I go into just like observational mode, and I'm writing down in my notebook things that I'm hearing, things that I'm seeing, things that I'm smelling, whatever. And I know at this point that that's going to be like the main part of my story, is describing this very dramatic process that's happening with this family. And then I'm going to go and take that and show how that ties into the policy thing. Like, here's what the county decided to do with its homelessness program, and here's a family that's being affected by that. And so I'm kind of trying to do a couple things at once. I'm observing all of that stuff. When I get an opportunity, I need to make sure that I get like the details of their situation. Where are they coming from? How old are they? Like, what's their situation? Things like that. In this case, I didn't use their names because they had some like sensitivity around it. But in general, I need to like make sure I get your name spelled right, get your photograph. So I'm doing that at one time. I'm like doing the observation and getting my basic facts. And so I leave the hotel. And now I need to not just tell this great story, great, like, compelling story about these people, but I need to make sure it fits into the rest of it, and that it's not just like, oh, this poor lady, but it's like, here's a whole thing that's happening. And so I have to talk to the county and like understand what it is exactly that they're doing, and like, what are the financial implications of that? What are the, how many people are going to be affected by that? So they're all talking about the landlord. Sometimes, like, especially when you're talking to, these people are staying at a hotel and the county's paying the hotel, so sometimes the people who are like in the middle of it don't have the full perspective. So you need to kind of like talk to a number of people to understand who all is doing things. I went through like some databases I have and found out who owns the hotel, and I found the phone number for that person who owns the hotel, and I called her, and she had like a slightly different thing to say than what the county did. And then I called a lady who's like an advocate for homeless people, and she knew about all this, and she gives me a slightly different perspective. So it's by getting all those different perspectives on one situation that I'm able to sort of accurately represent it, more so than if I had just gotten it right from the county, or just like taking this one woman's word for it, for like what the whole policy is. So I do all that. So that's like my full notebook is all the things that all those people said to me. I'm asking them all, can you send me documents? Like the homeless advocate lady sent me a letter that the county sent to everybody last week. This lady in the hotel, she shows me like the eviction notice that she got, and I can like understand what's going on there. And then so I go back to write, and I need to think about the best way to present all this, so that on one hand I'm showing the entire picture, on the other hand I'm like foregrounding this dramatic experience that this woman is having. The first couple paragraphs of the story, we call it the lead. This is something, when I was sitting there observing, this was like what struck me as the most like cinematic thing that would really capture people's attention, is the fact that they're packing and they're waiting for a knock on the door, and the vacuum cleaner is getting louder, and like, it's like an action movie sequence kind of thing. So I do all that, and I'm hoping that by the time a person reads through the first couple of paragraphs of this, they're going to be engaged. They're going to want to know what's happening to these people and why. And then so I get into, after that, some more of I start talking about the DHS policy and how many families we were talking about and the dates. And like, if I had led with this stuff, it would have been kind of boring. If I had started off with, she said she didn't end the contract, but just lessened the number of rooms, and her goal, that would be boring if I started with it. So it was good that I started with an actual person. And now that I have someone's attention, that they might be more interested in reading these details. And I'm also in this middle part kind of like trying to reconcile what different people are saying. So like the hotel owner is talking about she's just trying to help everybody. She's got rooms, they need someplace to stay. Isn't it terrible that they're getting kicked out? But I also am obligated to point out at this point that there's cockroaches in the rooms and bed bugs and stains, and it's like an objectively disgusting room that they're in. So like it's not, like, let's not pretend this is some perfect situation. So when I start like I did with an anecdote with some people's stories, usually I'm going to want to come back to that at the end and kind of tell like the rest of their situation, and we call that the kicker. The end of the story is the kicker. And so I like come back to them. I talk about them passing their belongings out the room into the parking lot, and the daughter says, we just need to leave this place first. And so for me, like as I'm interviewing, I'm kind of listening for things people say that I know will serve like as a kicker, the thing that really gets your attention or really wraps the story up at the end. And I'll kind of like underline that in my notebook, make sure that I use it. I thought it was a good illustrative example because it's got interviewing, it's got like some creative writing elements into it, but there's also a lot of like reporting element into this. Like I guess that's what I would say is an important thing about that's maybe distinct from creative writing, like pure creative writing, is that I need to have everything fully supported by like the actual facts. So like the only reason that I can write this sentence, it's everything they own stuffed into a few black garbage or grocery bags, the blankets and quilts stacked neatly, that actually existed, and I need to like train my eye to take note of that and write it down and understand where it can fit in my story. I can't just go back and be like, it would be useful if she had like a look of terror in her eye or something. Like I need to substantiate all that stuff. So that, usually when you have really good writing in a story, it starts with really good reporting and really good observation of detail and putting yourself in the right place to get that detail.
How much are you planning the story as you are reporting? Is it all just fact-finding, or do you start seeing a narrative while you're out there?
It can be both. So in this case, when it's like a complicated policy story, like this one sort of is, and I'm not a housing expert, I need to make sure that I'm really nailing down the facts of what's happening, because I don't really understand it totally when I'm going in. So a lot of that, and then like biographical information, you really have to nail that down. This was particularly more complicated because I was doing all this with the family in Spanish. So my Spanish is good enough, but not perfect. So like that, in this case, that's really my first priority. But at the same time, as I'm seeing this stuff all unfold, like as I see, it's 10:45 and they need to be gone, I'm for sure know at that point, that's my lead. This is going to be the thing. So I need to get the details. I need to capture what it sounds like and whatever. Other times, if it's a simpler story, I will focus more on the narrative as it's happening. And if there's something like, this is an important metaphor or an important point, I will make a point of like elaborating upon that in the interview to make sure that I get all that detail. So it is for sure in my mind as I'm going.
I think a lot of our students have a lot of trouble starting. Do you map it all out on a graphic organizer? Do you use just your notes? Do you have it in your head?
In terms of like just writing the first sentence?
Like just write, the actual physical starting or writing an essay or writing a piece.
Yeah. So it for sure helps to have. I don't do a ton of like plotting things out, but I will know I'll sometimes write a story that's like introductory section and then a couple of chunks and then a conclusion section. So that's not unlike an essay. And I'll know in advance if I'm going to do that, kind of like generally what goes into each of those. But this is what I would say are like my tips for getting going. The first one is that I seldom write the story from top to bottom. And in particular, if I'm, like in this case, I knew what the lead was going to be, but a lot of times I don't. A lot of times I don't have like a wonderful anecdote I'm going to start with. And so what I usually do in that case is I take, if there's any sentence or anything that I know is going to be in there, I know for sure that this sentence is going to be in there somewhere. I write that. And it doesn't matter if it's an important thing or a less important thing, or if it goes by the top or by the bottom, or I don't know. Write something, like some sentence that you know for sure is in there. And once you do that, first of all, you've broken the like traumatic experience of having a blank screen that you need to do something with. And second of all, you then can look at that and say, oh, well, I know once I say that like this is probably what will come next, or this is what will lead into that, or this goes along with it. And then you can kind of like go like that. And then maybe if you run out of steam on that one, you can do another one. I know for sure that this sentence is going to be in there somewhere. And then you can kind of like piece them together. In terms of the lead, like the first sentence, so this is a little bit different for journalism, but the options are an anecdotal lead, which I said here, like an interesting thing that happened that you start with to draw people's attention, or what we would call like a straight news lead, which is just like what is the thing that the story is about. So like in this case, if I were to do that, if this is like later on, I say, the tight housing market in Rochester and elsewhere has been a major problem for people lacking housing altogether. The Motel 6 on Chilai Avenue near the airport was one of the key emergency outlets. On July 27, DHS informed homeless service agencies it would no longer place people there or extend the placements of people already living. So that's like what the story is actually about. That's what I'm trying to tell you in terms of policy. So if I didn't have a good anecdotal lead, I could have just put that at the top. So you can think about, so like what I usually tell people, if you don't have any kind of lead, if you don't know how to start the dumb thing, then take whatever the most interesting thing is that you're going to write, like whatever it is, whether it's an anecdote, whether it's a fact, and put that at the top. Because like for me, that gives me the best chance of the person continuing to read all the rest of it.
Can I interrupt there?
Yeah.
I never took journalism, but I taught for 5 years, and what you just did off the top of your head, that's why you're a professional. That was really well done, actually. How you were able to pull all that out and put it there. You pretty much nailed it your first try, so that was pretty good. I'm sorry.
They get paid to read what you write, so even if it stinks, they gotta read it anyways. They don't have a choice. But like, I'm gonna very quickly lose my audience if I don't like actively get people interested. So, yeah. Just like, if you're telling somebody the story of your day, you tell them the interesting things first, and then you get later to like what you had for lunch or not. Did you ever? Well, I don't always. Sometimes I don't find out until people start emailing me and telling me that it stinks. I think that when you have human beings that are really affected by whatever it is, and you have compelling interviews with them, and they say compelling things, that's like the number one ingredient of a good story. So, for example, I write a lot of stories that come from school board meetings. And like the superintendent and school board members will be talking about whatever policy. Like, for instance, I'm going to be writing one soon about suspension rates. And I got the idea because tonight at the school board, there's a document that breaks down suspension rates at all the different schools, and like, some are up, some are down, whatever. So that's like important, and that needs to be written about. But what will make it a good story, as opposed to just an important concept, is if I go into a school and find a classroom or find a kid who got suspended, and this is their life circumstances, and you can see yourself in them, and I'm able to draw that out and explain it. That will make it a good story if I am able to do that. Yes.
Do you have anybody that is helping you to edit or revise, or do you have an extra set of eyes of anybody that's helping you when you're writing?
Yeah, I do have an editor who generally reads all my stuff, and sometimes, especially on a larger piece, we'll talk a little bit about structure, and we could use another voice here, or did you ever think about moving this part up higher, things like that. So yes, and it's kind of up to me how much I lean on them. If it's a big long thing, then I'll probably be talking with them along the way, like here's kind of what I have in mind. If it's something, this was an important story, but it was also a fast one. Like, I got to the hotel at 10:30, and this was probably written by, I don't know, 3 o'clock or something. So
It says it was published at 3. So you had a quick turnaround.
yeah.
Yeah.
So in that case, there's not a lot of time for knocking it back and forth.
So the one thing that I'm hearing though is to make the story compelling, instead of just all the data, you're looking for the human element of it.
Gotta have humans, yeah.
So why is that important to bring it back to the human element?
Because that's the only reason we care about stuff, like, that's the only reason why we care about high school graduation rates, is because that represents human beings in our community who we at some point might interact with or rely on. It's human beings reading stories. They want to hear about human beings. There are some people that just like to go through the data, but it's boring. That's right, boring. So I'm kind of the intermediary. I'm someone, reporters were somebody who, I know how to read the data. I have the patience to read the data. And then I also have the skill set to turn it around and show it to other people in a way where they don't have to go through all the numbers, but they can get the gist of it.
Are you physically putting notes on paper and then putting them on the wall, or creating a graphic organizer, or how do you organize all of that so that you can put it together in a cohesive piece?
Yeah. I personally like using Microsoft Excel for that kind of thing. I can make like a list of stories, and then for each one, a list of like, here's who all I need to talk to, here's who I already have talked to, here's the date that it might be ready, whatever. In terms of like actually writing notes, when I interview somebody on the phone, it's usually my computer, and I type the notes. When I'm out interviewing people, like for this one, for instance, I'm writing in a notebook by hand, and that, I think that's like a skill to develop, because I'm saying that this is exactly what they said, so I can't be like paraphrasing and then recreating quotes. I'm really trying to get every single thing that they said. Of course, complicated again in this instance by the fact that they're speaking in Spanish and I'm doing my best to translate it. A lot of, I think, especially younger journalists will always audio record everything that people say and then go back and do it later. That obviously is really good for accuracy. it's not really good for moving quickly. Yeah, but so I have like folders, you know, so I got my folder for the tree project, and then I got a folder for data on this and on this and on this, and then I got a folder for, there was like a big historical component, like how did it get to be this way, so I have a folder for that, I have a folder for academic studies I find, and then I've got Word files of interviews I did with people. And so like that was an example where I'll spend part of my day going through this data, going through these academic studies, talking to professors and environmentalists or whatever, and then also I'll come out in the afternoon and walk down Genesee Street and just be like, man, it's hot out today, isn't it? And like talk to people and like, oh, look, the trees, and like that, it's like an entire different mindset about how I'm doing that part of it. And it's my job to take what they say and put it in the context of everything else.
You do all of the observing, then you have to go back and do, like the next step would be your research, right?
Yeah. They can go in different orders, but yeah, and especially after you get observing and you get a person's personal experiences, it's important to be able to go and put that in context. So like in this case, I don't remember, but I'm guessing that what I did was I got an email saying people have to leave the Motel 6, and so the first thing I did before I went out was wrote an email to the county saying, hey, I'm going to be writing a story about this. Can you tell me what's going on? Like, what was the decision? When was it made? Why? And then so like, while I'm at the hotel reporting, they're working on that already so that they'll have it for me by the time I'm done. And then, so then I'm back at my computer. I have my notes. I have their thing. And I can start piecing it together, seeing like, you know, where does something not match up? Like, in this case, as I recall, the county said that it stopped placing people at the Motel 6 because the owner had like taken rooms off the market. But then in another instance, they said it was because of the sanitary conditions. And so like that's kind of my job as a reporter to point out when people in power don't have a consistent story for what they're doing. So I'm like looking for those things. I'm double checking things that people say. You know, the county says that it has been like anytime a powerful person, a government agency says, we informed everybody about this last week, I'm going to go and check with some of those everybody and make sure that they actually got informed. A lot of times that's not true. So as you gather stuff together, then like you kind of triangulate it and double check it and poke it and see what you're missing and that kind of thing.
When you're looking, after you have all your research done, you have all your facts, where do you know where to focus your story? What do you think grabs your reader?
I mean, I think that the best principle for that is, you know, like, if you put yourself in my position, and I just told you what my day was like. I went to the hotel, I talked to this woman, I talked to the county, I talked to whoever else, they told me various things. If you were then to go home to your mother and said, what did you do today? Like, you know, and you say, I was working on this story, it was crazy, and you said, what was it about? What would you say? I would say, geez, you know, like, the county, they stopped placing people at a certain hotel, and I was in the room with this lady, and it was crazy, she was having to pack up all her stuff and leave, and like, it was raining, and she's crying, whatever. Like, whatever the first thing is that you would say to somebody is probably the first thing that you want to write. You know, just like if you say, you know, what happened at school, and you like, you know, got 100 on your big test, that's the first thing that you say. That's the lead of your day. So I would say there's the question of what is it about, like what story am I telling? You know, that's one thing. In this case, that's a policy thing. And then how am I telling it? And that's more about like what goes first and whatnot. People are always interested in human beings. Like that's always what grabs your attention. That's always going to be more interesting, more broadly interesting than just like a data presentation of, or a policy presentation. So that's always a goal. When I hear about a change in policy, whether it's at the school district or housing or anything else, I want to find people who are affected by that and see what what that looks like on the ground. And then conversely, when I find an interesting person, I want to expand that story. You know, because like if I had just wandered into this hotel room and found this lady getting kicked out, and she said, "Yeah, they said I have to leave, but I don't really know why, and like I don't know where to go." That's very compelling on a personal level, but it's not at all clear like what is going on here. Right? Like she doesn't know what's going on. So you take the big stuff and personalize it, and then you take the personal stuff and expand it out. I would say are kind of the two ways to think about it. So not descriptive enough. Yeah. That is, I think, something that every writer from elementary school to professional writers, that's like the main thing of your story, is the main challenge is finding those details. And part of it is like being a talented enough writer to put them down in a compelling way, but the bigger part, I think, is just observing them and noticing them. And that's kind of a way of thinking. That's like something you train your mind to do. Obviously, it's a little bit harder when you're looking back on your past or something, but if I were to write about my relationship with my brother, it's hard to put into words, right? It's been like, forever. But I would think about like, what are those moments that I recall that seem important, that seem like they say something about it, and then what can I remember about what that looked like, what that sounded like, what, where we were, whatever it was. But it's a lot easier when you're doing it in, like, for me, I'm going to go out and consciously gather my stuff, so I know if I'm in the hotel room, what do I hear, what do I see? Yeah, but that's a very normal thing to worry about if you're only writing.
So when you start off to write, do you have it in your head that you want to write a good story, or that you're looking to get published, or do you just write?
Well, I mean, my situation's a little different because I know it's going to get published. I think that that's a matter of like respect for your reader. That I'm gonna do everything I can to summarize this information, to package it, and to make it an enjoyable experience. So as I'm reporting, I'm thinking about like, how will these facts fit into the actual structure of my story, and then like, how can I'll make sure to ask enough questions or get enough observation on a point if I know it's going to be important. So like, I know that this lead here is going to be based largely around observation, and so I'm like, even more so than normal, I'm taking stock of my surroundings. That's not, I don't do that if I go to a school board meeting and I'm going to write about whatever decision they're making. I don't usually bother to like notice what posters are on the wall in the conference room, or like what people are wearing or something like that, because that's not like a dramatic situation, and I know that that's not really going to get into the story. But if it's a case like having to do with actual human beings out in the world doing something, it will get into the story. So I like take stock of which things are going to be important, and I focus on those.
So you pretty much have your reader in mind as you write?
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I think that that's where, I mean, I read all the time. Reading is like, that's my number one hobby. And I think that when you read a lot of, I mean, books is one thing, because a person who gets a book published by definition is like several people along the way decided that they're a pretty good writer. To not only for them to finish writing the book and have someone publish it, but then it gets into like, the librarian picked it or whatever. So like, that's going to be a pretty good example. But when you read stuff online, sometimes, for instance, you can tell when somebody's going out of their way to get your attention and meet you halfway, and when they're just kind of doing like, like book report, like, here is what I learned, and da, 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 da. So it's important, not only to ensure that they read what you're doing, but that's kind of like, I don't know, I think about that as like my end of the bargain, is you paid to subscribe to the newspaper, you're an interested citizen, resident of the area, and my job is to make it worth your while.